knew this was coming, Pete.
Right, so, I said, if this is what you say makes a fallacy...
Yeah, except that's not what I say, or even said, makes a logical fallacy.
You suck!
I was explaining the various characteristics that logical fallacies have in common to demonstrate the point that logic is content agnostic. So I was providing a number of logical fallacies as examples, not definitions. Ironically, I even tell you at the end of the comment that I have a video coming out soon that does explain what makes a fallacy a fallacy. Not sure how you missed it. Look, I know you enjoy responding to arguments, and that's great, but have you considered reading them first?
If this is what you say makes a fallacy, then let me ask you what is wrong with this argument.
You are the king of the red herring, the prince of procrastination, the chancellor of changing the subject, the queen of self-contradictions. I can't think of any more.
If this is what you say makes a fallacy, then let me ask you what is wrong with this argument.
Wait a minute. That's why you're giving me this argument? Well, that's nonsensical on like 4 different levels. Just so I understand this. You are providing me with this argument because you want to challenge something that I never said. Okay, I get that. Just one problem. Let's put aside the fact that I never once stated what makes a logical fallacy here. Not once. Also, let's put aside the fact that I never once defined validity here. Not once. Let's put these 2 issues aside because they're just straw man fallacies, and I'm used to that. After all, you and Pete have the attention span of an immature chimpanzee with ADHD, and a set of moral principles to match. Here is my question. Are you providing me with this argument to address what you think I said makes a logical fallacy? You know, because you said...
If this is what you say makes a fallacy, then let me ask you what is wrong with this argument.
Or, are you providing me with this argument to address my understanding of validity? Because you also said...
I decided to test his understanding of validity. So I gave him what would be called I gave him a disjunctive argument.
So, which one is it, Casper? Which statement that I never said are you trying to address? Maybe you're actually giving me this argument because you and Pete seem to have this idea that catching me making a mistake somewhere will somehow magically prove some point about me being a fraud or a liar. or that it will be a sufficient demonstration of how educated I am in logic or philosophy, or any of its subsets or concepts. It won't. But, I mean, it's cute that you think it will. The argument you provided would not demonstrate my understanding of logical fallacies or validity if I got it right, just like it would not prove I do not understand validity or logical fallacies if I got it wrong. But I can understand how you made that mistake. It's okay. Philosophy takes practice. You'll get there.
Number 1. I have an even number or a prime number.
What you have is a mental problem.
Number 2. I have an even number. Therefore, I do not have a prime number. Okay, so what is the fallacy here, and why would you say there's a fallacy?
I don't care because it had nothing to do with what we were talking about.
What is the fallacy here, and why would you say there's a fallacy?
So he's given me a flawed argument and he wants me to spot the flaw. Here's the problem, Gaspar. And are you paying attention this time? Are you paying attention this time?
Are you paying attention this time?
If you and I disagree on an aspect of logic, the solution is not for me to take your test, which is quite literally pre-assuming the truth of that which you are trying to demonstrate. A perfectly circular argument. It's like you're making a presuppositional fallacy and using yourself as an objective authority, which, ironically, is the fallacy we were discussing in the first place. But guess what? And stop me if you heard this one. Even if I'm wrong and you're right, it would not prove a single accusation that you've made. You know, one of my most favorite debates that I've watched quite a few times was the debate between Christian Matt Slick and atheist Matt Dillahunty. Matt Slick told Matt Dillahunty, "You're not qualified to discuss Christianity." Now, Matt Slick didn't know that Matt Dillahunty used to be a Christian for quite some time. There was a period in this debate where Matt Slick had found out for the first time that Matt Dillahunty used to be a Christian and was actually studying to be a minister or a priest of some sort. Dillahunty, of course, said, "Well, I was a Christian for quite a few years." Matt Slick answered back, "Oh, wow, well, I didn't know." Quickly followed by, "Well, let's see what you do know," and then proceeded to test Matt Dillahunty on Christianity. To which Matt very understandably responded with, "I'm not here to do that. We're actually having a conversation right now. We're not here to try to measure philosophical penises."
Agree that Christians don't agree on the God concept, or people identifying as Christians don't agree on the God concept.
No, we can't agree. I can't see that as a true statement because the implication is that you're implying all. Let me explain why. You're implying that all Christians always disagree in all aspects of the God idea.
No, what I'm saying is that there are Christians, people identify as Christians, who have different God concepts. They have different concepts in their mind of God.
Like the Mormons and the Christians. Yeah, the Mormons are not. You know, this isn't a debate on Mormonism and Christianity because it's an in-house debate. But I wanted you to understand that there are certain realms within Christian theology in the Bible, and I'm quite qualified to discuss who and what God is biblically versus other religious systems. When you talk about denominational difference,
and I'm not.
No, you're not. I'm
not. 25 years as a Southern Baptist, studying to be a preacher. I'm not qualified to comment on Christianity.
Oh, I didn't know you were 25 years and studying to be a preacher. I apologize. I had no idea. Seriously, I didn't know. So let me test you then. Let's see what you do know. Okay.
I'm not interested in that right now.
Oh, okay. So I would test to see if you really know what Christianity is, because when I hear you say things like this, it tells me you don't.
To know true Christian fallacy.
I know what the Bible says about Jesus Christ, for example. I know what it says about him. If someone says that God...
As do I, Matt, and my point was...
No, you don't.
This was very simple. I said there are people who... I made it as easy for you as possible. There are people who identify as Christian who have different God concepts. That is simply a fact. And it's a fact because...
You are absolutely correct. People
then
do.
Why didn't you say that a second ago when I asked this very clearly?
Because you're not understanding that there is a true issue of what Christian is.
I don't care what you think a true Christian is.
You don't?
No, it doesn't matter because somebody else has a different definition of what a true Christian is, and until the two of you provide a mechanism by which I can determine which is a true Christian, then you're on the same footing.
Okay, is the Bible good enough for you?
Probably.
It's what we Christians claim is our source document.
Sure, but there's this matter of interpretation and a matter of potential contradictions. The church has debated all sorts of things over the course of history, not to mention the fact that there are, like the John and comma and other things that are, were kind of added there to support this idea of a Trinity. Because
Comma Johanneum, 1 John 5:7. Called the comma Johanneum, right?
It's also called the Johanneum comma.
Okay.
But, I'm not going to measure biblical penises with you right now because we're actually talking about something separate.
So, in short, if I'm taking the time out of my day to debate or conversate with you, you're not going to stop in the middle of it so you can test me according to your standards. Like, if I were to fail, it proves your claim is true. This is something that I'll probably have to point out a few times through the video, as I had to tell you then as well. For everyone else watching this, I apologize. I thought they were here to demonstrate how I was a fraud or a liar, not talk about a single disagreement that we had like 8 months ago. You literally don't even know what you're responding to. You couldn't back up the original claim you made, so you're trying to construct a secondary debate that I don't even care about. But here we go. He says, I have an even number or I have a prime number, which doesn't give us much information because 2 is a prime number. 2 things. 1, congratulations. 2, I don't care. The title of this video is exposing a charlatan, but you haven't done that. The only thing you've done was make accusations and then talk about a disagreement that we had and then show us all where you changed the subject.
Ninja.
If you wanted my definition of validity, you should have, asked me what my definition of validity was. So what's your definition of validity? Well, it's how you evaluate the structure of an argument. Okay. This is a complete waste of time, because you can give me an argument that has quite a few different flaws in it. I can just ask you to show me the flaw, and if you don't give me the right one, I can just say, nope, incorrect. You don't get to just stop in the middle of a discussion to try to administer someone a final exam. Either way, the argument is invalid for multiple reasons. This really isn't that difficult. I have an even number, therefore I do not have a prime number. 2 is a prime number, so, therefore your piss-poor argument is invalid because the conclusion does not entail the premises. Outside of that, I don't really care. Now, you also talk about my attitude in a somewhat negative light, while mentioning the fact that you like to respect other people and their views. However, you're the only one making comments like, I guess I'll have to spell it out for you. And you notice how I'm not replying with any return insults or snappy comebacks? Because, well, I'm obnoxious. The most humorous and ironic aspect of this whole thing is this little test argument that you gave me had nothing to do with the debate we were having at that time, and it's got nothing to do with the accusations being leveled against me right now.
Okay, so what is the fallacy here, and why would you say there's a fallacy? And Nick's kind of coming in. He's starting to chime in here.
And Nick's kind of coming in. He's starting to chime in here.
So let me get this straight. The rare times you choose to actually read my comments, you make sure to do it with an obnoxious voice, and then mention how forceful I'm being, when the only forceful trait being displayed is my voice, which happens to be provided by you.
But he's saying, that's not what an appeal to authority fallacy is. And he says, yes, I understand you found someone who defined it that way.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And if that's not convenient enough, you will strawman my argument and dishonestly reduce my comment to a single word.
And then he said, he's now telling us about the argument from ignorance.
And if you don't want to actually read my side of the argument at all because it just might be hindering to your position, you can always replace my argument with blah blah blah, or sum it up by saying he's just rambling.
Qualifies a rule as a logical fallacy. The argument blah blah blah, and he's just rambling. And so he rambles on here something about science.
If all else fails, no need to worry. Just make a sarcastically hyperbolic claim disguised as a joke and move on.
He's kind of trying to talk, he's like, equals X is true until X is proved to be false.
No need to actually respond to it for real though. That's what insults are for, right? After all, we don't have time for things like evidence, the burden of proof, proper examination, unbiased evaluation, and basic skills in mature conversation. We only have enough time to... Well, hold on. Nick is chiming in. Let's make sure to point that out. It's very important, and that's because Nick is not a dumbass like you, Pete. Nick is not an idiot like you, Gaspar. Nick is willfully ignorant. There's a difference.
And Nick's kind of coming in. He's starting to chime in here.
Oh, is that what's happening? Nick is chiming in? Aside from the attempt at the egotistically immature 7th grade action you've got going on here, what does it have to do with anything? You quite literally want to claim that I was being obnoxious, at the same time claim that I was being egotistical, while at the same time pointing out for everyone to laugh at insults that you've hurled my way, sarcasm that you've made. The thing is I wasn't the one being rude. I don't call people names and talk to them disrespectfully. You dumbasses do that.
And then he says, yeah, I'm sorry, it's not like I'm guessing on this. Here is the characteristic that qualifies a rule as a logical fallacy. The argument blah blah blah, and he's just rambling. Blah blah blah, and he's just rambling. And he's just rambling. Blah blah blah, and blah blah blah, and blah blah blah, and blah blah blah, and blah 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 blah. And it's just rambling.
Really, I just ramble. So you're in the middle of going through a debate, trying to show everybody that you can handle evaluating evidence and argumentation. But when it comes time to address your opponent's arguments, earlier it's blah 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 something about science. Now it's blah 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 something about rambling. That's a nice straw man fallacy, but if you're unable to read anything that I wrote properly, or at all, then you've not only proven that you don't have the ability to properly evaluate an argument unbiasedly and or fairly, but you've also demonstrated that you cannot handle an academic conversation like an adult. Just rambles, huh? Is this how you address all of your opponent's arguments? I'm afraid I wasn't the one rambling. I'm just the only one left discussing what we were discussing. Your evaluation of a debate is nothing to take seriously, because you don't take it seriously.
Blah blah blah, and he's just rambling. He just cites basically the basic introduction to informal logic stuff.
Yeah, hold on there, Pete's Dragon. I'm basically citing the basics to informal logic stuff. What the hell is informal logic stuff? I know what informal logic is, but I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean when you say informal logic stuff. How about we read what I wrote, because apparently that's too difficult for you guys. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's not like I'm guessing on this. Right here, I'm referring to the fact that logic is content agnostic. Here's the characteristics that qualify as a rule as a logical fallacy. The argument from popularity fallacy. It simply states that the truth is in no way impacted by the amount of people who believe in it or by the strength of their convictions. If you notice, there is no subject matter, because a fallacy is either a formal fallacy, which means it addresses the flaw in the structure of an argument, or it is an informal fallacy, which means it evaluates the soundness of a flaw, which can only evaluate objective statements, not subjective statements. Fallacies describe the concept of the flaw, and not the content of the flaw. So, you clearly did not read this carefully enough, because I wasn't talking about informal logic stuff. I was talking about the characteristics of logical fallacies, both formal fallacies and informal fallacies. But I guess it's easier to knock down my arguments if you just replace them with blah 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 and he's just rambling. And just a little extra side note for you, just because you're too lazy to read something doesn't mean it's the basics of everything. Referring to each of my comments as Logic 101, just listing off the basics of this, the basics of that, is kinda ridiculous. And I hate to correct your observation here, Freud, but I'm not ignoring questions. I'm ignoring you changing the subject. I'm ignoring your attempt to question me on a single argument that has quite literally nothing to do with what we were talking about.
He just like cites basically the basic introduction to informal logic stuff, and it isn't actually answering the questions. By the way, the informal logic material he's talking about here, this is typically not propositional logic, because propositional logic is actually the beginnings of formal logic. So,
right. Typically not propositional logic, because propositional logic is actually the beginnings of formal logic. So, right.
Slow down there, Watson. Why are you disagreeing with something I never said? Please answer this for me. Where did I just come out and say this was propositional logic? You already accused me of citing the basics of informal logic stuff when I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. You've already accused me of incorrectly defining the method of validity when I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. And now you're accusing me of trying to label something as propositional logic, when, guess what? I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. Because as far as what we were originally talking about, it was the characteristics of a logical fallacy. Just because you and Pete are obsessed with me and propositional logic doesn't mean you get to point to just any random comment I've made and say, this is not propositional logic, as if I said it was somewhere. You don't even take the time to point out, here is something that Jason is calling propositional logic, and here is why it's not. And don't get me wrong, you guys are the best at making claims and accusations. You're the masters at it. If it was a sport, if it was an Olympic sport, you have the gold. It's yours. When it comes to actually proving these claims and accusations you have, you guys suck.